thank you for going before, because some of the things that you expressed and talked about are actually also close to what I researched. When we're talking about identifying and looking for healing processes for our communities, that is kind of where I pull in some of my research. So I discussed food inequality in Black America. This research came to me initially not something that I thought, hey, I'm going to do this. You know, it was kind of a surprise. But the more I got into it, the more I started kind of really trying to look at the way food affects Black families. I was reminded of my own upbringing, and we grew up in extreme poverty, and that poverty included nights without food. And so I was taken back to that space of remembering what that was like and what that meant for my brothers and I, family time, for example, things like that, growing up, not having those essential elements. So that adding that personal element into it really pushed me to kind of look at this a little deeper. Okay, so my research question, my statement of research question was, how do Black Americans live with and through food inequality? And I separated it that way because as I started to delve into the research, what I found is that there are some of us within the Black community who are really living through this process, with this process, and we don't understand it. We don't understand how food really affects our everyday lives, and more so than that, the systemic issues that are tied in with our food. We really don't understand it. So I couldn't leave that element out. But I also couldn't leave the element out that there is a whole lot of us that are moving through living with food inequality and really pushing towards food sovereignty. And I'll kind of explain shortly why I got to those different definitions. The framework that I really used was systemic racism as defined by Joe R. Fegan. The reason I really focused and honed in on his kind of how he framed systemic racism was because, one, he provided a absolutely phenomenal historical foundation, and the main thing that he says and acknowledges was that America was built on and founded on an anti-Blackness, and that anti-Blackness is distributed even unto other minority groups. And so that perpetuates how things happen within our society from every single level, from the top up, the top down. So that was one of the things that I really appreciated about his approach to systemic racism, not leaving that out. He really goes very deeply and thoroughly of using historical documents and research and painting not only a historical picture of anti-Blackness, but an economical picture. For example, he discusses how shortly after World War II, the GI Bill was distributed to white Americans and denied from Black Americans, and he breaks that down into numbers about the percentage of white Americans that are descendants of those who received that GI Bill and what that effect will or could have on us today. So you not leaving out that historical element was something I absolutely appreciated, his assessment of systemic racism, which is why I used him as a foundation. And understanding that systemic racism, when we look at it, it's kind of, I kind of view it like this umbrella, right? And I tell people who don't know, systemic racism is this umbrella. And imagine that the umbrella has holes, and there's water droplets coming through. So we understand one of those droplets might be education, police brutality, housing inequality, even propaganda in the media. But oftentimes we don't acknowledge or even understand how important food is and how that plays in. So some of the methodology that I used to frame this research, I did 6 in-depth interviews with an organization, HABESHA, Inc., which is based out of Atlanta, Georgia. I did my research in Atlanta, Georgia. And I also did some observational research with some neighborhoods in Atlanta, Georgia, of different economic backgrounds. And I'll explain that. And again, that led me to the 2 parts of the research, the living with and the living through. What does that look like? Okay? So as I got into the research, I had to define what is food inequality, what is food security, what is food sovereignty, okay? And to not waste a whole bunch of time. So food security was a definition that was created in 1999 by members at the United Nations World Hunger Summit. And interestingly enough, I couldn't find who these specific individuals were. The definition states, let me pull that up. It says that food security happens when all people at all times have physical and economic access to sufficient, safe, and nutritious food to meet their dietary needs and food preferences for a healthy and active life. Now that sounds good, right? But here were some things that I looked at when I viewed that definition. One, again, I have no idea who the audience were, who the writers are, and so that affects the definition because this definition fails to address the largest systemic issues that are plaguing Black Americans in food. On top of that, it frames food insecurity, it frames it as food security, not as an insecurity, not as something that is lacking. And it really takes the approach that, look, as long as everybody has this stuff, all is well. And I've come to decide later in my research that this is very much for a reason, and I'll get to that in a moment. Food inequality is defined as the inability to access quality food due to high levels of poverty. Now, this is a more appropriate definition. However, I also took some issues with this definition. It omits race completely from the conversation. And as I delved further into my research, I found this to be the case when we are discussing quote-unquote scholarly articles. Race is not discussed where Black Americans and food are intertwined, okay? So I looked at food sovereignty and came across a definition. Rights of peoples to healthy and culturally appropriate food produced through ecologically sound and sustained methods and their right to define their own food and agricultural systems, foodfirst.org. That definition obviously resonated with me a whole lot more. But this acknowledges not only the systemics that are involved with food inequality, but it also gives power to the people to change. And I use that definition when I look at how people are moving through food inequality, and I frame food sovereignty as really the goal, okay? So, as I get to this, as I started to delve into this research, like I said, there was not a lot of literature. I found actually specifically about 2 articles where Black people, Black Americans, let me be specific, Black Americans in food were concerned, and both of them were pertaining to religious institutions, both of them written by white women. One addressing the NOI and kind of their whole process and take around food. The other one, the Pan-African Orthodox Church and their long history with food. But I was really taken aback at when we talk again about Black America specifically, we're not being discussed in the conversations. Now, if you want to talk about Black people throughout the diaspora, which believe me, I am all for, that's fine. But I really started to ask myself why. Why is it that there seems to be this idea that Black Americans are not suffering from hunger? Why does it seem to be that Black people are not in great poverty and that food affects that? So I started having to kind of put together this base, looking at how socioeconomic status affects our food, okay? If you don't have access or have money to buy healthy food, you're really not going to do it, period, point blank, okay? How does this affect our health? How does not having access to quality food affect our everyday lives? And even looking at things like the types of restaurants that are placed within our neighborhoods, the access to the restaurants that we have. You know, it's a quick walk to the McDonald's that are on every corner. But to a food store that is going to provide you quality produce, you might have to take a bus that's going to take you 20, 30 minutes to get there if the bus is running in that neighborhood. These are just some of the examples of how socioeconomic status then tied into health. I also looked at crime, how that affects food, and one of the most interesting things that I found was, in fact, that many people, when they talked about food and going to jail, for example, we're talking about recidivism rates, these gentlemen and these women were going to jail because there was food. It was guaranteed they were going to eat there. So not even understanding and looking at how people committing crimes are affecting people's food access. And obviously, the big picture that was missing from the conversation was race. People are just not discussing the fact that race is an issue where food inequality is concerned. People talk about food inequality in a very monolithic fashion, and again, where America is concerned, it's kind of the month, okay? So we obviously have to kind of go back to this historical understanding, right? Understanding that first and foremost, our history does not start with slavery, but acknowledging and understanding the importance of what that institution means for how we function in today's society. Understanding how that perpetuated Reconstruction era, the Jim Crow era, the Civil Rights era, and all the aftermath of how we're moving as Black people in today's society. You could not leave that historical context out of the conversation, and for many people it did, okay? So then I started looking at kind of the institutions in general, how we have been institutionalized in this country, realizing that legally, slavery began in 1640 in this country. From 1640 to 1865, that's 265 years. We had 12 years of Reconstruction, which included things like black codes, which were more legalized oppression to Black people. The Jim Crow apartheid era is 88 years. And so you're looking at approximately America being only 240 years old, but realizing that Black people in this country have been in some form of legal bondage for 325 years. That's longer than America has been a country. And that says a lot when we take those things into account and look at how that affects our food intake. So you're probably saying, what does this all have to do with food, right? Well, as I told you, looking at socioeconomic status, I found some interesting things. Almost half of all white men who work in the food chain were employed as managers, and a quarter of all white women perform managerial roles across the entire food system. That's from growing to restaurants to fast food services. So what that's saying is our food is being controlled by white people. 3 out of every 4 heads of food-related jobs are white. And again, not even when we tie in health into those, we're looking at how there's a lot of information about how mental health is affected by food, okay? We understand how physical health is affected by food. And again, I told you, just looking at even things like behavioral health, how the criminal justice system is affected by food. You cannot leave those things out when we talk about food inequality in Black America. So race is the elephant in the room. And again, I kept asking myself why. So it drew me back to the UN, which America is a part of, considered one of the big 5 countries of the UN. So we are essentially one of the heads at the table of where the UN is concerned. And as I pulled up just a 2015, I did this research last year, so the 2015 World Summit Hunger Map, and looking, and I have this if you all want to see this later, but looking at where they're actually taking numbers and documenting what hunger looks like in those countries, there is little to no documentation, little to no research being done here in America about hunger. Now, why would that be the case? Well, then America gets to go into other countries, and they get to say, we're here to help feed you, and they get to use their finances and their aid, and then they get to essentially take part in running how that aid is distributed in other parts of the country. I'll let you draw your conclusions on that. All right. So some of the themes that I pulled out from my research, the main was that no matter what area I kind of went to, this is what I got: family history, education. Because it's not enough to just understand that there's food inequality. You have to know how to prepare food. You have to know how to buy food. You have to know how to shop for food. So it's not just enough to have access to resources. You have to also have the education for those resources in order for them to be effective. One of the other themes I pulled out was land. Again, our health, our economics, and as the sister before me discussed, trauma. And what does that mean for Black America? So when I get to this idea of living with, one of the things that stuck out to me the most was, as I traveled the streets of Atlanta, Georgia, looking at various different neighborhoods, okay, the neighborhoods that we would consider economically deprived, many of those neighborhoods have what we would call a corner store. I have some photos if you all want to see those as well. And those corner stores are consisted of similar things: big glass on the windows of those who are working. Usually huge tubs of liquor is the first thing you see when you walk in. And everything in there is processed and old. So essentially, and this is where people are going to shop for their food, for their groceries, to feed their families at night. So you are putting people in a space immediately, okay, that they're not healthy. And that is going to have a trickle-down effect. And so I looked at, what does the process of living through look like? I used my organization that I interned with HABESHA Inc. And they really have this wonderful, wonderful process. And some of the things that I pulled out through talking to them was understanding that Black liberation has always been tied to food. So we think about things like the tactics in the civil rights movement were tied to food sit-ins, right? The Black Panthers and their free food programs, right? The Nation of Islam, the Pan-Orthodox Christian Church, about buying land and growing land. Black liberation has always been tied to food. And so HABESHA, as I looked at and talked to all of the participants, some of the things I pulled out, everybody had a similar story of how they got to what I call this living through process, and essentially this healing process. It started off really for some health reason, whether it was themselves or a family member. Somebody found a need to be healthy. And then that drive to kind of be healthy started tying people into looking deeper at their family history. And that provided an educational process for them. And tying in not only our history here in the States, but also connecting that back home to the to the continent. And then again, looking at that, looking at the land and how that ties in not only to our healing process, but why we were brought over here to the States to begin with, all right? And then HABESHA has a wonderful, wonderful, wonderful approach where we look at economics and how economics is really tied into growing our own food. You grow your own food, you can sell your own food. We can sell to each other, and we can build things, not only just growing our own food, we grow our own supplies. We're taking from the land and using them, kind of the circle of life effect. And that creates an economic base, which provides us with some sustainability. And all of this really becomes a healing process for the trauma that we have been through in this country. And that perspective, like I said, from all of the HABESHA participants came in one form or another. That's kind of the flow that I kind of figured out is how they go. And I have some charts you all are welcome to look at for that afterwards. And HABESHA really does this in a really unique way. They have 4 institutions that they use within their organization, and we could talk more about that after. To tie it up, some recommendations that I found is, obviously, for me, there has to be a separation when we are talking about food between people of color. There absolutely has to be. And with that, you have to then acknowledge the racism that is tied into food. You have to look at not only the resistance as we have had it throughout time in this country, but also what that resistance looks like today. You cannot remove race from the conversation, and therefore you cannot remove racism from the conversation. What I didn't do, there needs to be some further research into some of the sub-ethnic groups. I definitely, for the purposes of this research, looked at Black in America as a whole, because as I talked to people from different backgrounds, whether they be from the islands, be from the continent, there were some similarities as they processed their food here in America. But there definitely needs to be further research done into those sub-ethnic groups and some of the cultural understanding of those. The biggest thing for me, the biggest recommendation was that Black scholars need to take the lead when we are talking about these issues. It cannot be white people. White scholars need to find other areas of contribution, and that's the bottom line. They need to be able to be a part of, but not leading the conversation, because then they are controlling what our healing process looks like. And in my opinion, we are not healing if that is the case. So one of the things that stuck with me the most, one of the quotes is from Kashawn Myers. He says, because of our abilities to connect with the land is why we were enslaved in the first place. We saw it as it happened the other way around, that we were taken and then forced to work with the land. But actually, we were scouted and surveyed, and Europeans saw how connected we were to the earth and how we were able to grow and plant, and they took us into captivity because of that skill set. And that stuck with me, because that should be a continual reminder of not what has happened to us, but how great we are and how able we are to really get through some of these things that have happened to us. Yes.
Yes, ma'am.